products and services that augment the educational process. And in recent years, I've become consumed with the issue of privacy, particularly as it relates to children. So that's my background. I, am here to field questions that go through Jeff, where I can give you some specific answers, though with the caveat that there are no specific answers when it comes to a lot of copyright issues. It's a balancing test, so don't be too frustrated if there's not a yes or no answer there. But this conversation is going to be talking in broad generalities. It's not intended to be legal advice, and it can't be because not just because of liability issues, but because all of these situations are so very fact specific that it would be unfair to try and generalize in this conversation. Besides my voice being off, it also will be a much more enjoyable hour if you interrupt and ask questions and truly make it a conversation rather than a lecture. Like the young people we serve, lectures aren't exactly the most engaging form of dialogue. So we're going to focus on 3 issues today, and then I have some material that I can share with Jeff after that goes into the weeds on some of these issues. But as Josh mentioned, we're going to talk about some of the social platforms that have made their way into the classroom in recent years, and I'll be curious to find how much of this is hype online and how much many of you are actually working with classroom teachers that have experimented with the likes of TikTok and Twitch and Fortnite in your classrooms. So I'll learn from you as well in the process. The second, we're going to talk about something that we mentioned last year, but my sense is has become even more of an issue in the last year, is the idea of parents and how they are live streaming every moment of their kids' activities before they even enter the school system, and then carrying over those often bad practices into activities from Halloween parades to sporting events to theater. And we know what's wrong with that, what the solutions are to it. I welcome your thoughts because it is some practical problems that are necessary to be resolved first. And then we'll talk about some guardrails that some of the social media platforms have implemented and some legislation coming down the pipe that addresses some of these issues that you should be aware of. So with that introduction, let's see if this works. And so how many of you are aware of teachers or are working with school systems to use platforms like TikTok and Fortnite and Roblox in the classroom? Maybe, I don't know, what most people are muted here, so and don't have their pictures up, so we can't do a show of hands, but maybe if you can add something to the chat to say yes or no, whether you've been involved in that and looking into these questions. The thumbs up, that's the perfect way to do it. In doing some research for this, because staying on top of what's happening in the classroom has would be a full-time job these days with everything that's been going on. But it appears that all of these technologies have incredible applications to meet students where they are. And the first question that came in from Jeff was a school that was interested in, more for a music class or dance class, and they were lip syncing to TikTok, and it was okay, we're comfortable there. We know what TikTok has been, a lot of the short, dance and music videos, and that raises certain copyright concerns. And that was the easy part. And then you start to peel the onion and you find out that it's so much more than that. But with TikTok, what they have done is to go out and license a lot of music. They got in trouble first before they did that, but they did license a lot of music. So therefore, the copyright issues need to be checked, because it's not like they have the full library of every music that's ever been recorded. But they certainly have an extensive library of music, which makes it possible to do the lip syncing as part of a classroom activity. But it's so much more than that in terms of what can be done. And my understanding is that TikTok has become something where you can have, teachers can post for a short attention span generation, lesson plan information on there. Students can be interactive with it and really using a technology that they're familiar with to make the learning process fun. And that really is, a great thing. But before you embark on something like that, there really are some responsibilities, as with everything that goes along with that. And the main one is that you need to look at how you are communicating to the parents at the beginning of the year, and maybe it's mid-year when you decide to implement something like this, so that they understand what is being done, how the platforms are being used as part of the curriculum, understanding that the school or the school district or the teacher, and I hope it doesn't fall on the individual teacher's responsibility to make sure that the children's privacy information is being protected, and to really have a dialogue with the parents, because it's ultimately the parents' responsibility in terms of social media use. Schools have liability, public schools, we hate to keep saying this, but it's the reality that you have situations where sovereign immunity as a state-run institution, the odds are that you're not going to wind up paying money or be sued. Your school won't, your school district. Individual teachers, however, are not exempt from liability. So that's something to be cautious of, that you may, think you have more latitude than you really do because of that teacher liability issue. So it's worth checking into. And this is an area, like apparently every area right now, where there is a lot of, differing perspectives. And so again, you can hopefully enhance community relations rather than fracturing them more by engaging with parents early in the school year and letting them know what, how you're going to be using these social media platforms, and to really use it to build a successful community. The other point that I think I mentioned quite frequently in responses to Jeff's question is that it's so important for educators to really model best practices, and to not think, well, we can get away with this. No one's going to be watching. It'll be a great exercise for the kids, but to really use, whether you're teaching, math or English or theater arts, whatever it is, to use it as an opportunity, because it's so much a part of these young people's lives, to talk about how, copyright needs to be respected of third parties, that their copyright interests need to be respected, and how they go about doing that, and how to protect their own privacy and the privacy of others. So with that soapbox recording, let's move into sort of how do you protect it. So private information, and there are various definitions of this, but primarily we're looking at students' names, their faces, their home addresses, and even the names of the school can be private information that needs to be protected. If the student is under 13, you have additional requirements, and it's also important to get parental consent. If we have time, we'll talk about the details of the upcoming legislation, but it has been proposed in the House that age be increased from 13 and from under 13, not 13, to 16 and under going forward. And that is a dramatic change. This has been, COPA, which is the law under which student privacy is protected, is from 1998, and obviously it's time for a refresh. So if teachers, that are working with students in that 13 to 16 age range, the law is not going to be passed during, before the end of this year, but it is going to be, it's very likely to pass. And even if it isn't, it's a good idea to consider that a 14-year-old is not an adult and not making all of the perfectly appropriate decisions, and to sort of begin that process of protecting those older students who may be equally, if not more, at risk. So the ways to protect that content is to make links private. Live streaming things to a broader community does no good. Pretty much it's always going to be problematic, whether it's from the privacy perspective or whether it's from the copyright perspective. So I think COVID, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think COVID has really provided more opportunities and educated faculty around using private links in schools. And so that's something that should continue. Removing personally identifiable information. It is a scary world that we live in, and we were talking about this in more general terms right before the call began, was the horrible things that people are doing now. And even if you don't have a child's name associated with it or their home address, even the location of the school can put children at risk. And yes, it's that small minority of children that will have something bad happen, but none of us want something bad to happen to any children. And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that just anecdotally what I've seen is that private schools, because they're in the business of selling their school among the competition, et cetera, have been at the forefront of having a big social media presence to show how, smart and how, community service oriented and how their sports teams are doing. But I've seen this shift now where it is more about the local public schools are in the marketing business of their school, for lack of a better word. And that's something that I think that may not be top of mind for parents when they sign these releases at the beginning of the year. And they can raise both copyright and copyright and privacy issues. So for example, if you're doing, in a classroom, you're going to be, performing a skit and you're using copyrighted music, Yeah, that's going to be fine. No one's going to come after a school having a bunch of fourth graders singing a copyrighted song. But when you start posting that online and saying this is, what we're doing at XYZ middle school, then it can really become an issue. And will you be prosecuted? Will a teacher lose their private account if they're using it? Yes. But it's going to be a distraction for the school administrators to deal with these kinds of information. And so it's really in everyone's best interest to avoid those kinds of situations. It's also important, not so much as a legal issue, but it can be a legal issue, is to provide parents with alternatives. If for whatever reason they don't want their child to participate in videotaping of certain activities. I mean, it could be an acrimonious divorce situation, a child custody situation that is not necessarily going to get the school in legal hot water. But what if it's a disability, or it's the lack of technology that the parents don't have at home, or enough bandwidth to be able to do an assignment that involves technology? Those are issues that could cause problems for the school and need to be taken into account, as much just being thoughtful as it is risking technology, a legal liability for use of the technology. Copyrights. We talk about every year, we have a question about live streaming events like graduation and other theatrical performance, etc. And historically, when you had a graduation or a performance, you would get you could sing whatever song you wanted to, pomp and circumstances in the public domain. But now, to relate more to the children, they often pick a song that is a popular song, whether it's from a theatrical production or a movie that resonates with them. And when you're doing it in a live environment, is it theoretically, do you need permission? Of course, but as a practical matter, you'll be fine doing that. With theatrical works, there are clear agreements, and we've talked about that in some of our articles that we've written for Jeff that talk about getting permission for musical performances. But when you cross that line and go into live streaming, then you really run into problems, and the licensing agreements don't cover those kinds of things. By the time you decide that you want to use a song from The Greatest Showman, you probably don't have time, and there's going to be hoops, and the price may be minimal, but maybe it's not for whatever you're choosing. And so it's really something that you need to be thinking about well in advance whenever there's kind of live streaming. The other thing, this is kind of a bit off topic, but I think it's relevant. I don't know if how many of you have heard about this situation a couple of weeks ago, where a church in Texas, for mind-blowing reasons, decided that they were going to stage an unauthorized production of Hamilton. And not only was it going to be Hamilton, but they were going to change some of the songs and dialogue to more be in keeping with their religious beliefs. Well, they probably thought, who'll ever notice this? I mean, this church was really, really small. Well, the Hamilton producers did find out about it because it was live streamed, and there were 2 performances, and they collected donations for those performances. And I think Hamilton really very, very appropriately appreciated that they were, you know, the big player in this and had a lot of weight. They had the law completely on their side. But this was a small church, and there was public relations problems that they might occur as a result. And what they did was to say that the live stream had to be taken down. The pastor issued an apology and said, he didn't know that this was a copyright violation. And the church had to pay some undisclosed amount of money, which the Hamilton producers then donated to an LGBTQ organization or organizations, which was completely the opposite of what the church beliefs were. So you can get caught, and you may have a copyright holder like Hamilton who doesn't need the money and is very aware of the public relations aspect of going after a school or a church. But you may not, so you need to be careful with that. As these umbrella organizations really providing guidelines that are easily accessible to the teachers is really an important factor to go forward. It's just too difficult to do a one-off with every teacher trying to figure this out for themselves. You need to keep apprised of the different policies that are in effect. TikTok, for example, this year instituted a new policy that would remove content which promotes disordered eating and over-exercising. That's a scenario where it's easy to imagine a scenario where a health or gym teacher might encourage students to create a video about, a healthy exercise and a healthy diet, but they might unintentionally run afoul of some of these policies and risk a suspension of the account. So you need to kind of look at all of these situations through the lens of who's uploading it, where are they uploading this content, and what type of content, and make sure that there are adults in the room that are looking at that. The next thing I was going to talk about is the children's digital footprint, but I see there are quite a few questions that have come up, or questions, or maybe they're just answers. So maybe we should take a second, and I should read through these. Welcome, Brian. And I'm going to slaughter your name. Rojas is your last name. I'd be curious to hear more about how you all are using these different services, because again, I think they're so much out there, like Flip. I've never heard of Flip, so maybe you can weigh into the conversation. Brian writes, and private licensing versus public performance and licensing often trumps fair use. I would say 100% I agree with that the idea of getting a license, and there are organizations, Music Licensing USA, I think I might have that name wrong, but we talked about that before, certainly has a catalog of a lot of the material that you would want to license if you're going to do a musical theater production. There are the Harry Fox Agency and others where you can go and get the licensing right for the performance. And where possible, I 100% always encourage people to get those public performance licenses before moving forward. Fair use is a 4-part test, and the results don't always come out in educators' favor. I think there's, and I may be overstating this, but I think there's a sense that, because we're an educational institution and we're not for profit and we're not selling it, but you may be selling tickets to a theatrical performance, but not to graduation. Fair use applies, and that's not always the case, and it's certainly not the case where there is a licensing vehicle and you're taking away revenue that the copyright holder is entitled to receive, when you're not, also when you're just using the whole thing, where you're not making substantial changes to it. And that's one of the key questions we get all the time, and one that you can't answer in a vacuum, and maybe you can never answer without going to court and spending a lot of money in terms of what really falls under a fair use exception. So licensing definitely.
Oh, and Carol, can I just sort of amend that? Actually, I was referring to the fact that a lot of times these platforms, the license that is in place is for private use and not for educational or public use. And so that license trumps any sort of fair use argument you could make, because that license supersedes anything else because you've agreed to it. So great example, and not quite music related, but like streaming platforms like Netflix, Hulu, and pieces like that, those are private licenses, and regardless of how well-intentioned and fair use you're trying to use that, you can't at all because the license supersedes everything.
Correct. And that's one, I think in 2019 in Syracuse, that was one of the hot issues there, is because teachers had their own personal subscriptions to Netflix and the other platforms, and they were using those license agreements to show movies to their students in the classroom, and not a good thing to do that. So is that what you're talking about? I mean, those kinds of uses.
Yeah.
Yes, we strongly discourage those, and they could definitely, it's a violation of their own licensing agreement that they did with these services. What kinds of license agreements would we need to stream live, and how would we acquire those? That really depends on what the content is that you want to live stream, and whether they fall under certain blanket agreements. There are a lot of recordings that are held by one or two licensing agencies, and I don't know why I'm blanking on this Music Licensing USA, and it has another name that begins with an S, but they're ones, and I'll send it to you after the call, but they are one that particularly has agreements with nonprofits and schools to be able to license a catalog of material at what would be considered reasonable prices. The issue is that not all works fall within those license agreements, and often what the schools will do, because money is always going to be an issue, is they may not be able to get their first choice because it's not within one of those broader catalogs at a more reasonable price, that they may need to revisit how they're going to use certain music. So I don't know if that completely answers the question, but any follow-up, Amy? Is that kind of? Amy? Here, I'll be reading the next one.
Sorry, I was just responding in the chat, but yeah, I mean, it's helpful. I've tried to acquire the proper licensing in the past, and it's challenging, as you mentioned. And when I've researched it in the past, there seems to be like live streaming performance, and then there's public performance rights, and then there's a variety of licenses available, and it's always confusing as actually which one I would need and how to acquire it.
And often you need more than one.
Exactly, right. Depending on if you're live streaming it, if you're just posting it, yes, I agree. So just looking for some insight on that.
That may be something, Jeff, that we might want to consider for another article in terms of the different uses and sort of those overlapping rights. Will I be able to see the chat when you have the recording? Because that way.
Yeah, I believe the chat does show up on the recording there.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm going to make a note about that then. That's a very good topic for the next newsletter.
Yeah, I think we've handled each of them separately, but never really tackled the overlap. So great question, and we'll follow up on that. Is live streaming the same as a public performance? No. Again, because it is a live stream, can go out to a much broader, there's clearly overlap, but not exactly. Yes, Rojas's comment about the Read Across America and having educators read books, we definitely have addressed those. Has everyone seen, and you post some of the specific questions, right, Jeff, that have come up, and we also have the so when we've answered the questions about the principal reading bedtime stories, and we've answered, we do I don't know whether it's 3 times a year or quarterly, that we write a general article, which I think this one about the overlap in the licensings would fit well into an article for the winter. But the reality is that you know, no one's going to sue the teacher reading the story. As Brian just mentioned, those rights were extended during the pandemic, but can they go on forever? Because if you did a strict fair use analysis, you are taking, you could buy a copy of the book. Everyone can have that. And it really does take away the economic incentive of the authors. So let's go back and try and cover a little bit more of the agenda, and I'm mindful of the clock, so I'm going to kind of go through this pretty quickly. We've talked before about sharenting and a child's digital footprint. Sharenting is such a great word for parents that are recording and sharing aspects of every moment of their child's life on the internet. One statistic is that 92% of children have an online presence, and 1/3 of those include their date of birth, their full name, and their geotagged location information. This is not a good thing. And while we don't have a word for what schools are doing along the same lines, this is becoming more and more prevalent, and it really risks so many challenges. Identity theft, it's something that's going to live with these children for the rest of their lives. College admissions officers can see it, advertisers can see it and target them. for things they don't need to buy. Potential employers may be able to see this. And the education system needs to not get so excited about these new opportunities to share, and be very mindful of that once it's done, you can't undo it. You know, these children's privacy has been violated, and that they have a role to play in, again, educating the parents about these issues, and doing it in a sensitive way, because, you know, if one child can't have their video taken for some special event, you know, they could be bullied about this and et cetera. We mentioned the idea about schools promoting themselves and their sports teams and their Halloween events and those kinds of things. But the other issue is really to make sure that you advise parents early and often about what is included in a privacy release that they sign, and what the potential uses of that material is. And it's a dialogue, and it's a you know, an ongoing challenge. So you can have in the beginning of the school year where you have parents sign that said, you know, I give permission for my child's photograph or video to be used in the following circumstances. You can have language in there that says that parents, when they come to a school sponsored event, are not allowed to live stream those activities when it includes their children and other children. But then what happens when they do it? And we all know they're going to do it, whether they are told not to or not. And, you know, I'm curious, you know, put in the chat if you've got any answers on, you know, you can, I don't know whether they still even have detention in school, or, you know, you can be, you know, expelled or whatever, but what is the remedy with parents that are just so, you know, anxious to post everything about their child, and done not necessarily in a malicious way, just with their pride in their children and their successes and all their extracurricular activities that are, you know, putting the school at risk, putting other children at risk. It's just a very challenging situation to come into. With that, I'm going to circle back to the various social media platforms. And one thing, I think it also ties into the conundrum of the rights issue, is that each of these platforms has their own guidelines or policies related to content that is posted. So TikTok, for example, you know, is a great vehicle for condensed versions of lessons or quick summaries. It can be used for student presentations and group discussions. It has the duets feature where two videos can be stitched together so that you know, you can have the two children working on an assignment in different locations and still being able to present a finished product together. We've talked about the lip syncing trend, but what TikTok has done, and they've done it because they've been sued, is to amass an audio library of, it's always growing, but it was about 150,000 pre-cleared royalty-free songs that you could use on TikTok. And then they have a separate one that's a commercial library that can be used. And that's part of their business model because of the way they compensate the number of TikTok views. And, but that gives you a lot of latitude. But if a student at the direction of their teacher or teacher wants to upload these videos, you still have to do some homework. 150,000 is a lot of songs, but it's certainly not every song. And to make sure that that music is licensed on TikTok and free to be used as background for whatever educational offering you want to make. But then there's the caveat. It might work on TikTok, but YouTube has a very different business model. And so therefore, you may not be able to upload it to TikTok because they don't have the same licensing agreements. So, back to the question, I think that Amy raised, yes, there are ways to legitimately license the material that you need, but it's not a straight and narrow path. And you can put your best efforts, but you got to put a lot of effort in. And there can be still be problems along the way. And I think a couple of people answered whether they were using TikTok in their classroom, but I don't think very many did. The ones that I've become aware of more recently, besides YouTube and TikTok, is Fortnite and Roblox. And I thought of those as game platforms and avatars, but my understanding now is that those platforms have great application in the classroom for digital literacy, for computer modeling, for coding and programming, which are all things that is terrific in the classroom. But again, there are licensing issues and copyright laws that are important. It's not important to the end user, but Roblox was sued by the National Music Publisher Association for $200 million in 2021. The parties eventually settled. The Music Publishers Association is negotiating with Roblox. They've reached a deal with Amazon's Twitch platform. But again, there's a lot of homework that has to be done, and it's not something that, as a law firm, we can't give you a black and white answer in terms of what gaming services can use popular music and what popular music on any given day they can use. So it's a great opportunity to expand what's going on in the classroom, but it isn't easy. Roblox does have partnerships with Sony Music and with BMG Music. So it's coming along. We're just not quite there yet in terms of having, I would even say, reasonable assurances, not total assurances in terms of what underlying copyrighted material can be used. And also, it's not just music with some of these platforms, it's also the games themselves may be subject to copyright. So a lot of homework to be done on those issues. Let's see. What TikTok was a $5.7 million settlement that they didn't get permission from parents for children under 13. There has been, I think, the sense, even those of us that spend a lot of time in the privacy space have been troubled by the fact that you can't target children under 13, but how much enforcement has been going on in that space. And the Federal Trade Commission must have had the same question. So they too have been looking into this issue and finding, I think it was kind of in the early years, there were some investigations, but since 1998, it kind of wasn't the highest priority. And Google and YouTube have had to pay multi-millions in civil penalties for privacy violations. And the activity in the last couple of years may have made those platforms a bit safer to use, but I can't repeat it often enough that it's really incumbent upon the educators to see what they can use and to make sure that they're not in violation. They're not going to get hit with a $150 million liability, but the damage that they can do to the children is, maybe can't put a dollar value on those. And let's see. There's one thing that I wasn't thinking about focusing on, and then Jeff mentioned that some of you may also be working in the university setting, and there are two issues that are more applicable in the university setting, but as we've seen over the last couple of years, when we talk in a year, they could easily have trickled down into the, at least into the high school environment. And those are student cameras. I don't know how many of your schools, and I think we've talked about these in some of the Q&A before, in terms of having student cameras on when they did virtual learning. My understanding is that virtual learning is not going away. It could be an alternative for some students. It could also be something for snow days where that's applicable, or maybe if a child is just going to be out of school for illness or something for another day. So you still will have remote learning isn't going away anytime soon. And the issue is the access to private facts. And so, one is the issue of different economic status. So you could have the child who has this beautiful setup at home to do remote learning, and another who may be economically disadvantaged, or just not have a private space to do their work. And these are all things that have to be taken into consideration. There was, just in the last couple of weeks, Cleveland State University lost a lawsuit where they required students to scan their room before taking an exam. Now, why this student happened to have his tax records on in plain view in his bedroom, but he had to work in his bedroom because he lived in a group housing situation, and that was the only place that he could do this. I'm not aware of any of these issues other than more the socioeconomic issues occurring at the K through 12 environment. But given what we've seen before, my guess is that that's going to trickle down into that environment, and schools need to be very much aware of the privacy implications there, whether it's just for a classroom session or for an exam, and to consider the privacy implications there. And then finally, I would say that what I've compiled is all of the policies for TikTok, Switch, Roblox, Fortnite, and I can send those to Jeff, and he can circulate them as he sees fit to just give you a bit of a background on the safety features that these platforms have instituted more for the classroom application. And with that, I'm open to questions. We've got a couple of more seconds. So what are you all thinking, or any thoughts that you have on how to resolve the parent issue?
Hi, Carolyn. This is Ann Thorpe. I'm over in Michigan. Thank you for this information. It's been fantastic. A question that I have is, do you have any language for us that we might be able to use to send to parents so that they understand that there are some differences? I really like what you said earlier about using specific language in the whatever the parents are signing, whether it's called an AUP or whatever, to let them know that their students' images, videos, or works might be shared in a variety of ways. And they might say, it's okay to use my student in a, let's say, a school newsletter, but it is not okay to show them if they're doing a play or, like you said, a live stream. Do you have any language examples that you might be able to share with us?
I have some general language. I think it would be up to Jeff, how we, that would be kind of an additional assignment, but it's certainly doable. And I think that it would be along the lines that you're talking about, that it's not a blanket. I give my permission for you to do anything that you dream up over the next 9 months. It's got to be, you can use it for this, you can use it for something else. And then also use it to explain, this is why we need to have these checks and balances. Not something that scares parents, your child's going to be kidnapped.
Right.
Tomorrow.
It happens, but you're right. It's in the minority. Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't want to be the parent that it's the minority that
right. Or the teacher that posts it and then, yeah.
Right. And so I think that's a very doable project. We just have to work out the logistics with Jeff to do that. But I think that's, I assume all these letters have gone out for this year, but maybe even in January to sort of say, here's an update. Because everything that we think of today, in 6 months, we're going to think of 2 or 3 other opportunities to use this private information that we want to be able to cover. So, yes.
Thank you.
Anything else? I think we're at 4 o'clock, but and I know everyone's busy at the beginning of the school year. Yes, it is complex. There are no simple answers to any of this, and I wish I could give you a here's the answer, it's black and white, we're done. But that's not the way copyright has worked for, since the Constitution. And with technology, it's definitely not going to work that way going forward.
Hey, Carolyn, one question. Do you know, are there any resources out there that we can share with the schools about sharenting?
We did a great article on sharenting. I can send you that, and it has quite a few links, and one that's a bit more academic. I think that one of our law clerks sent me an article recently, the kind with footnotes and 100 pages, but it's easily skimmable, that talks about the sharenting. But this is having this digital footprint from, first you're going to post the picture the day the child is born, so their birth date is already known, their name is known, probably the hospital location is known, so we assume that they didn't travel very far to have babies. So on day 1, information that should be private or private to your close circle of family and friends is now out on the internet, and it only gets worse. And there's a company well, what's it called? There's this great piece on, this week, last night with John Oliver, that talks about this company that is an offshore company that is collecting all of these images, all of this information from Facebook, from, live streaming everywhere. And their original audience was police departments tracking down criminals. But as with everything, it's evolved, and now it's an extraordinary database of information about just regular folks. They take yearbook photographs. So, I mean, not even something that's new technology. This is old technology of yearbook. And with artificial intelligence, they know who we all are. And I don't mean to be paranoid, but I'm paranoid. Now there's information, your information is just out there, and the European Union has done a better job of trying to protect that private information than the United States has. And we are now in a situation where they're reluctant to do business with us. This is more in the corporate, not the education space, because we are so far behind in terms of protecting the privacy, and in my mind, protecting the privacy of children, not only because they're children, but because their lifespan is going to translate more into when the technology is even worse or more intrusive. Worse may not be the right word. It's literally scary to me.
Okay, well, I think we are just beyond 4 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for tuning in this afternoon and joining us in this conversation. And very special thank you to Carolyn for joining us. As always, I come away, I learned so much from these sessions, because there's just, as we know, it just changes every day. So again, we appreciate all of you, your continued support and dedication to education. That means a lot to all of us, and together I think we can make a difference.
I agree. A positive note to end on. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.